is my review of Cells at Work Code Black. Okay, so this episode actually explains how Gout works, and also kind of goes to kind of a bit of a dark place, in terms of 2153's mental health, but I'll get to that in a minute. So it starts off with 2153, as where it immediately left him off last episode, where he was just kind of holed up in his apartment, not really interacting with the rest of the world, just kind of being off by himself and just kind of not caring about anything at all in the slightest. And we've established that he kind of doesn't want to work anymore, but as it turns out, there's a bit more of a bigger reason for that. Apparently, he blames himself for what happened for 1167. And yeah, basically he blames himself for what happened to his friend and how he kind of just, died protecting him, and how he blames himself because he believes that had he not been injured, he probably would have survived. And 1677 probably would have survived and not died. But as he's contemplating that, 1196 actually begins to contemplate what exactly is going on with the body, and also what's going on with her friend. At which point she hears a bunch of cells kind of complaining about how bad the body's deteriorated. As it turns out, not only has waste kind of built up in the body, but apparently, as it turns out, some fat cells have started to build up in the body as well, due to how much eating and drinking the body's been doing, and it's starting to sort of become a bit overweight. And 1196 hears all of this, but she realizes that she can't do anything to do about it. At which point she gets a call over her radio that they need to report to the big toe, because apparently there's a pathogen in the big toe and they need to go deal with it. So they do. They immediately she gathers up with her two white blood cell friends, and they continue go into the toe, where they discover a massive floating thing, a massive spiky ball type thing just floating in the big toe. And they're immediately unable to identify it. As it turns out, the brain cells are unable to actually identify what it is. The immune cells can't figure it out. And apparently they have no records of such an antigen existing, because they have this universe's version of memory cell trying to analyze it, but all his data is coming up blank, and he can't find anything. And realizing it's an unknown pathogen, they send the macrophages and white blood cells in to actually go in, try and identify the antigen and figure out what it is. And they do, only to discover that they can't actually attack it. And realizing that it's so resilient to being attacked, the head whatever he's called, the head immune cell calls in Defense Formation 1, which basically means that they go all out on the pathogen to try and attack it. Basically, they bring in the big heavy artillery, and they bring in all the available white blood cells, and they just go to town on it. And they point out that as long as they were able to defeat the pathogen, it doesn't matter how much damage they're causing to the body. Meanwhile, 2153 is walking through the streets in the direction of the big toe, where everybody's fleeing from. And he meets up with the normal cell that was apparently friends with 1677. And she points out that she hasn't seen him in a while, and also points out that he was always going on and on about praising 2153 and how hard he works, and how he kind of admires 2153, and how he worked hard to always give it his all, and which is why 1677 always worked hard to give it his all. And sure enough, the normal cell asks 2153 where he is, and tells him to keep him safe, only for 2153 to break down because he realized that he didn't do that, and even outright admits it to her face before running off. And we do find out a little bit later where he's actually running off to. As it turns out, the spleen one of its primary functions is to actually isolate red blood cells who are no longer able to do their duty. Specifically, older red blood cells who are no longer healthy enough to actually continue to carry oxygen and about to die. And it monitors them regularly as they pass through to make sure that they're still fit to work. Case in point, we see an older red blood cell who goes through to get processed. He's not allowed to work anymore, and the red pulp, who basically just resembles a giant judge, he just declares that he's no longer fit to work and thanks him for his service before processing him. At which point for 2153 shows up at the spleen, and I think you can see where this is going. So basically 2153 shows up at the spleen and then begs the red pulp to process him. So, which basically is assisted suicide if we go to that logical train of thought. Basically he shows up at the spleen to kill himself. That is basically what it boils down to. 2153 can't live with the fact that he unfortunately let one of his friend die on his watch, is unable to cope with that, and decides to go to the spleen to have himself processed so he can kill himself. So yeah, he basically tries to commit self-suicide. It's pretty dark. I mean, it's Cells of Work Code Black, so obviously things are going to be a little bit darker here, but still, he wants to commit suicide. That's a bit of a dark turn to take. But when 2153 admits all of these things to the red pulp contemplates it for a minute, but then points out that he hasn't quite yet figured out how much his meaning of work yet, and declares that he's not going to process him because that's not what the spleen is for. The spleen is to process people who have found a purpose in their work and have lived out their lives to their fullest, and that's not 2153. He hasn't quite yet worked out what he wants to be and how to find meaning in his work. So 2153 just kind of leaves the spleen and is unable to kill himself, thank God. But in case the white blood cells are continuing to go all out assault against the unknown pathogen, at which point they finally discover what the pathogen actually is. And as it turns out, it's not a pathogen. Apparently the body has been ingesting a lot of things that hasn't been good for it, which is obvious, but because of that, uric acid has actually been building up in the body, and the end result was this giant crystal thing that was just kind of free floating through the big toe. So, and sure enough, it was heavily implied that this wasn't indeed a pathogen, because it was in a place that is normally very weird for a pathogen to go. So obviously it was never going to be a pathogen. But in any case, the head immune cells tell the white blood cells what's going on and how they've actually been hurting the body rather than helping it by trying to fight off a pathogen that didn't exist. So, at which point 1196 realizes that what she's been doing and how she's been hurting the body rather than helping it. At which point 2153 shows up with a lead pipe and points out that why does that matter? He points out that as he puts it, if they don't hurt the body enough, then the body is never going to actually hear their cries and their pleas and never actually improve and get better. And with that, he starts smacking the immediate environment and proceeds venting all of his frustrations toward the body. So, and with several other cells taking his example and following suit. And 1196 can't help but look at all of this in awe, because she realizes that this is kind of the exact opposite of how to take care of the body. And indeed, 2153 eventually breaks his pipe and begins using his fists to vent his frustration, which causes them to bleed, obviously, since she's punching dirt and concrete. But eventually 1196 decides to intervene and stop him, and points up and tells him to knock it off, pointing out that this isn't how you're supposed to take care of the body. And while 2153 snaps at her, pointing out that she shouldn't be trying to stop him, she instead just pulls him into a hug, pointing out that she's had her fair share of comrades die in her as well, points out that in this world cells live and die at a breakneck pace, that as long as the body's in a code black environment, it's never going to actually be fixed and actually change. But that she points out that the best thing they can do for the people they've lost is just continue to protect the body that they gave their lives for. And also points out that she knows that he's been feeling bad about his friend and how he died, and points out that 6077 wouldn't want him to feel bad and that he shouldn't be blaming himself, and puts his glasses on him, since she was the one who found them. Edmund points out that now he no longer needs to worry about it, and that all he needs to do is really protect the body. And with that, 2153 begins to break down and sob and finally properly grieve his friend, since now he realizes that what he's been doing and basically inciting a rebellion is not what the body would have wanted, and not what his friend would have wanted. So he realizes now that 1677 wouldn't have wanted him to just kind of throw everything to the wind and just destroy the body that they had worked so hard to protect. So at long last, 2153 is able to come to terms with what happened and finally properly grieve. At which point the head immune cell quickly begins to point out that he realizes that the body only caused this problem because it was pushed to the brink. The body developed gout because it was pushed hard, and while there was a drug administered that enabled it to repress white blood cell immunity problems, so that they could actually stop the gout and actually cause it to go into remission. He points out that the only reason it happened was because the body was pushed to its limit, and if nothing changes, then the body is likely going to continue to push itself to its limit, and eventually bad things are going to happen. And as it turns out, bad things are going to happen, because the original rookie, the new rookie red blood cell, and the older red blood cell that's been working with them. He points out how he's in the coronary artery, and he's pointing out how the body has begun to deteriorate a little bit, and how the blood vessels have begun to deteriorate, and how it's getting a lot harder to move forward, and also how everything seems to be a bit understaffed, and wonders where everybody is. And eventually the rookie trips and drops his oxygen, and the red blood cell goes to help him, only to discover a red blood cell cap on the ground with no evidence of who it is, but then decides to just kind of ignore it for now and go help the rookie regather his oxygen, unaware that a blood clot is actually formed in the coronary artery. So yeah, basically to interpret that, the body is building toward a heart attack. That's what's happening here. So the coronary artery has been blocked up, which means blood flow can no longer get through the heart, and the heart is going to go into a heart. The body's going to go have a heart attack. Basically, that's what's going to happen. Basically just going to the coronary artery can no longer pump blood to and from the heart, so the heart is eventually going to go into a heart attack. And case in point, that's what the next 2 episodes are going to be. So yeah, that is going to be a very big arc for the series to cover, because that's going to be a turning point for the body. It's going to be a big arc where the body's going to have a heart attack, and it's going to just be a matter of seeing how are the cells in the body going to be able to handle the body while it's going through a heart attack. That's going to be interesting to discuss. But in any case, that's my review of Cells at Work Code Black. What did you guys think? Let's get a discussion going in the comment section down below, or over on my Discord server, link in the description. Anyway, thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoyed, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Also, be sure to follow me on Facebook and on Twitter in the description below. And also, be sure to check out my Patreon in the description below as well. It's only a couple bucks a month. It really helps me out, and you guys get access to a bunch of cool perks and my way of saying thanks. So be sure to check those out in the description below as well. But if you also want to see more videos from me, then be sure to check out the videos linked in the end screen. The top one is the most recent video. It may or may not be this one. Whereas the bottom video is the video recommended to you based on what you've already seen from me. So if you want to see more of what you like, or want to try something new, then be sure to check both of those out. But regardless of whether or not you do any or all of those things, thank you guys so much for watching, and until next time, I will see you guys in the next video. Peace!